Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into the Bhagavad Gita. It's just this incredible source of, well, ancient wisdom.
It really is.
And we're not trying to tackle the whole thing, obviously, and that'd be massive.
Yeah, a bit much for one go.
Instead, we're focusing, really zeroing in on one specific chapter, just to give you a real taste of its depth.
Exactly. We're going deep into Chapter 5. It's titled Karma Sannyasa Yoga.
Karma Sannyasa Yoga.
Which, we can translate roughly as the Yoga of Renunciation in Action.
Okay, renunciation in action. That title alone, it sparks a question, doesn't it?
Right.
I mean, is it better to just renounce action, step back from everything, the daily grind, all of that?
Is there another way? Can you stay involved, stay active, but maybe with a different mindset?
That's the core of it, isn't it? The central question of this chapter. And it feels so relevant even now.
Absolutely. Think about your own life. Haven't you faced that? Wondering whether to pull back from something challenging or lean in?
Definitely. Career stuff, relationships, even just daily commitments. It's a constant tension.
It really is. That pull between engaging with the world and wanting to withdraw. It's fundamental. So we'll be looking closely at some key verses from the Gita itself.
Right.
Seeing how this ancient text tackles this very relatable problem.
And our mission today.
It's really to pull out the core insights. What does it say about action, about renunciation? And importantly, how can that lead to, inner peace, even when life is busy?
And I think you mentioned there's a bit of a surprising angle here.
Yeah, there is. A key takeaway is how the Gita defines a renunciant. It's maybe not what you'd first expect.
Oh!
It's not necessarily about, physically giving things up. It suggests that acting in a certain way, that itself can be a path to liberation.
Interesting. Okay, well, I'm ready. Let's get into it.
All right, so the chapter kicks off with Arjuna. He's the main warrior figure, and he's got this dilemma.
The question we were just talking about.
Exactly. He basically asks Krishna, his guide, which way is better? Renouncing actions, that's sannyasa, or selfless action, karma yoga?
It's that classic conflict, isn't it? Wanting detachment, peace maybe,
Yeah.
but also feeling that pull of duty, of responsibility.
Precisely. That desire to simplify, maybe even escape the messiness, versus the feeling that you have to engage.
So how does Krishna answer him? Does he pick one straight away? Like, this one's better?
Not exactly. It's more nuanced.
Yeah.
Krishna first says, look, both paths, they lead to the same place eventually. Liberation.
Okay, so both are valid.
Yes. But then he adds a crucial point. He says that for most people, selfless action, karma yoga is generally, better, or maybe more practical.
More practical, why is that?
The reason he gives is
Yeah.
it purifies the mind.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. Doing things without being wrapped up in what's in it for me. Yeah, that probably clears out a lot of mental clutter.
It does. It tackles the ego, the attachments, right where they operate in action.
But this idea of true renunciation you mentioned, it sounds like it's not just about quitting your job and heading for the hills.
Definitely not. Krishna really clarifies this. True renunciation, he says, isn't necessarily about the outward act, abandoning your work or duties.
So what is it then?
It's about how you perform actions. Doing them without being attached to the results, to the fruits of your labor, as it's often put.
Without attachment to the results. Okay, that's a key distinction.
A huge one. And there's a great line in verse 4, something like, the wise see knowledge and action as one.
Knowledge and action as one.
Yeah, it shows they're not opposites. Understanding and engaging the world are deeply interconnected. You don't have to choose one over the other in that sense.
Okay, so the focus shifts from what you do to the intention, the inner state while you're doing it. This is where it gets really interesting for me. What does this person look like? Someone who embodies this true renunciation but is still active? How do they operate day to day, according to the Gita?
Right, so verses 7 through 12, they paint this picture. They describe the karma yogi, the one practicing selfless action, as the true sannyasi, the true renunciant.
Even though they're working.
Even though they're actively involved, they participate, but crucially, without selfish desires driving them. It's almost the opposite of our usual image, isn't it?
It really is. It suggests that engaging fully, but without ego. That's actually a powerful form of inner renunciation.
That's the core idea. It kind of turns the traditional picture of renunciant, solitary, withdrawn on his head.
So someone could be deep in their career, their family life, all their responsibilities.
Yes.
And still be practicing this kind of renunciation just by their inner approach.
That's exactly what the Gita is suggesting here, and the text goes on to explain why this works. It says such a person isn't bound by negative outcomes, by what we might call sin or bad karma.
Why not? If they're acting, aren't actions supposed to have consequences?
They are. But the binding quality comes from the ego and attachment. When actions are done selflessly, directed towards the well-being of the world, there's a term for it, lokasangraha.
Lokasangraha.
Yeah, acting for the good of all, basically. When that's the motive, the actions don't create those personal entanglements. It connects what you do to a bigger purpose.
Acting for the greater good. That really elevates the idea of daily work, doesn't it?
It does. It gives it meaning beyond just personal survival or gain.
But how do you maintain that? How do you stay detached when you're right in the thick of things? Life throws curveballs. Things go wrong.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
The Gita introduces this practice, the idea of offering your actions, offering them to Brahman.
Brahman, meaning like God or the Supreme.
You can think of it that way, or as the ultimate reality, the underlying principle of everything. The point is to act with a purpose that transcends your own ego, your personal gains and losses.
So dedicating your efforts to something higher.
Exactly. And verse 7 says the result is freedom. Freedom from being bound by those actions. It says something like, the wise, purified by karma yoga, conquer the mind and senses, see the self in all beings. They are not tainted by their actions.
Not tainted by their actions. Wow, so having that higher purpose, seeing that connection, that's the key to this inner freedom, even while acting.
That seems to be the essence of it. It shifts the whole game.
Okay, so that paints a clearer picture of this active renunciant. Now, what about the state of mind? For someone who's really got this, who's truly realized this state, what's going on inside?
Right, well, verses 13 to 17, they really dive into the perspective of the self-realized sage.
Okay.
And the core understanding is pretty mind-bending. It's that the true self, the Atman, it doesn't actually do anything.
Hey, even when the person is clearly, moving, talking, working.
Even then,
yeah.
From the perspective of that deepest self, it's like an observer. The actions are happening through the body and mind, driven by nature, but the self remains untouched. Yeah, there's a classic analogy used, the lotus leaf on water.
Ah, I've heard that one.
Right. The leaf is on the water, it's supported by it, but the water doesn't stick to it, doesn't wet it.
So present, involved, but not clinging, not affected internally.
That's the idea. Detachment right in the midst of activity.
Okay, but what about good and evil, right and wrong? If the self isn't the doer, who's responsible? Where do those judgments come from?
Another profound point. The Gita says, basically, God or the Supreme doesn't create sin or virtue. It doesn't hand out merits or demerits like that.
Really? Then what causes suffering? What binds us?
Ignorance. Our lack of understanding of this true nature of the self and reality, that's what binds us. And conversely, knowledge, true understanding, that's what liberates.
So it puts the responsibilities squarely back on us, on our level of understanding.
Very much so. It emphasizes the power of knowledge, of insight, to transform our experience. It's not about blaming some external force, but about awakening to our own true nature.
And this knowledge, this awakening, what does it let you see?
Well, verse 16 puts it beautifully. It says something like, when the light of knowledge dispels ignorance, the wise perceive the Supreme as the all-pervading reality.
Seeing the Supreme everywhere.
Yeah, it's like that aha moment, but on a cosmic scale. Suddenly seeing the underlying unity, the divine essence in absolutely everything.
Wow. That's a huge shift in perception. And that must lead into the next idea, right? The idea of equality, samatva.
Exactly. It flows directly from that vision. Verses 18 through 26 talk about this. Seeing Brahman, that ultimate reality, equally in all beings.
Equally in all deals.
Yes. The verse famously mentions seeing the same essence in a learned and humble Brahmin, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and even an outcast.
That's radical. It completely transcends social status, species.
Everything.
It's about looking past all the superficial differences, all the labels, and recognizing that same fundamental consciousness, that same divinity within everything. It cuts through all duality and judgment.
So how does holding that kind of vision affect how someone experiences life day to day? Does it change how you react to things? Immensely. The Gita says it leads to a state of being undisturbed, unshaken by pleasure or pain.
Unshaken.
Yeah, because if you see the same underlying reality in good times and bad, in pleasant experiences and unpleasant ones, they lose their power to completely throw you off balance. The ups and downs still happen, but your inner core remains steady.
How do you get there? Is it just about having the vision?
The vision helps, but it's achieved through mastering the senses.
Yeah.
Not suppressing them, like killing them off, but understanding their pull, their tendencies, and not being ruled by them, gaining control.
So it's about building inner resilience,
Yeah.
the emotional stability that comes from that deep understanding of oneness.
Precisely. It's equanimity. And the ultimate result, the Gita emphasizes, is lasting peace.
Yeah.
Real deep peace that comes from getting a handle on desire and anger.
Desire and anger, yeah, those are powerful forces.
Huge drivers of our reactions, right? So mastering them is key. And maybe the most encouraging part in verse 24 is this idea that the joy isn't out there somewhere.
It's within.
Exactly. One whose happiness is within, whose contentment is within, and whose light is within that spiritual seeker attains liberation. The source is inside you.
Finding joy within, that's a very hopeful message. Now, the chapter doesn't just talk philosophy, right? It gets practical too. Meditation, sense control.
It does. Towards the end, verses 27 to 29, it touches on the yogi's practice, how they withdraw the senses. It uses that vivid image of a tortoise pulling its head and limbs into its shell.
Okay. Pulling back from the external world.
Right. Shutting out the constant stream of distractions, focusing inward. It's about developing that ability to concentrate, to not be pulled here and there by every little thing. Something incredibly useful in our world today, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Creating that internal space, that quiet.
Exactly. It's about building that inner sanctuary.
And the payoff for that kind of disciplined inner work.
Supreme bliss, that's what the text promises, attained through dedicated meditation and self-discipline. And the chapter wraps up by reinforcing that understanding the supreme, seeing God as the enjoyer, the recipient of all sacrifices, all dedicated actions, that leads to ultimate freedom, to peace.
So it's like aligning everything you do with that higher understanding again, offering it up.
Precisely. Verse 29 sums it up nicely. Something about the sage who acts without wanting the fruits, who is content, independent. They don't really act in a binding way, even while doing all sorts of work.
Okay. So if we were to boil it all down, chapter 5, what are the absolute key takeaways for you?
Well, first I'd say is how karma yoga, selfless action, and jnana yoga, knowledge, aren't opposed. They're complementary paths, both valid routes to liberation.
Right, you don't necessarily have to choose.
Exactly. Second, and this is huge, true renunciation, it's internal. It's about detachment within, not necessarily just giving up things externally.
That's such a crucial point, I think. It makes this wisdom feel more accessible. You don't have to become a hermit.
Not at all. And third, the chapter paints a picture of the wise person, someone who sees the divine everywhere, who stays balanced through life's ups and downs, and who has gained mastery over their own senses and mind.
Seeing the divine in all. Equanimity, self-mastery.
Yeah. Ultimately, Krishna is saying, whether you take the path of detached action or the path of knowledge-based renunciation, they both lead to the same goal: union with the divine, inner peace, liberation.
That's incredibly profound. So as we wrap up this dive into chapter 5, maybe it's worth taking a moment for you listening.
Yeah.
Just reflect on your own life. How do you usually approach things, your work, your tasks, your interactions? Are there maybe some areas where bringing in a bit more of this idea of detachment or shifting your perspective towards a bigger purpose could actually bring you more peace, more clarity?
And here's a final thought to maybe chew on. Pick one thing, one task or responsibility you have right now.
Okay.
How might your experience of doing that thing change if you tried to approach it with these principles?
Yeah.
You know, selfless action, inner detachment.
What would it feel like to offer that action in your own way?
Yeah. What does that mean to you right now in your context? It's definitely something worth contemplating further.